morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm John Kimbell. I'm going to be the moderator of the panel. We've been hearing a lot about reconciliation. Tanya brought up the importance of reconciliation. I find that reconciliation has become stigmatized and is a little bit of a joke and not clearly understood. And I want to cut right to the heart of what I think it's all about. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out with, 90 some recommendations. And I think that, for my money, a lot of them are misguided. It's not that all of them taken by themselves are okay. One of the recommendations is to put greater education, more education about Indigenous history, and in particular residential schools, into the public school system. The hope is by learning about this that people will understand us more, Canadians will understand us more, and they'll like us better, and we won't have such a bad life. And I thought to myself, well, this all came out of a court case where Native children were damaged and murdered and abused. Shouldn't all the money go to Native children and Native families who suffered this abuse? Instead, the government's going to spend money on putting curriculum for the nice white kids. And to me, I say to myself, with the limited money that the government will create for reconciliation, why wouldn't they be giving it to Native schools, Native curriculum, better teachers, better curriculum, and to help us out? Lunch programs, breakfast programs. Why would we put the money for white kids? Not that I'm against it. I think it would help. I think it would be good. I think the government should do this anyways, without extra funds from the government. So for my money, the residential schools, the murdered and missing Indigenous women, lack of homes, unclean water, Inuit suicide, which is 11 times the national average, the highest in this country, and the poverty is all about our relationship, our fundamental relationship, which through the Indian Act is apartheid. We've never abandoned it. It's the official policy today. So when we talk about reconciliation, we're going to have a concert in Canada today. We're going to have a lunch, and we're going to put education into the mainstream schools. To me, this is all the small stuff, and it's the stuff where we get talking about things on the side. The main thing is to amend or get rid of the Indian Act. It is the fundamental policy today of apartheid. And until we fix the major problem, nothing else is going to work. That's how I'd like to open. So today we have 4 fabulous musicians of Indigenous heritage, of national and international fame. I think a lot of them will tell you that fame is not why they're doing it, that celebrity is a byproduct of what they're doing. What's interesting is that this generation of young people are not only appealing to our community, but they have a broad audience to right across the ethnic spectrum, right across national boundaries. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the meaning of music, where it comes from, and I think let's start with Susan. Everyone knows Susan the Glue Clark. I should introduce everybody. Mike Downey, the brother of Gord Downey, who is himself a filmmaker and a writer. We have Bear Witness, a part of A Tribe Called Red, who's having phenomenal success. AKA Aaron Thomas, who's been to Australia, has an international career. The albums are fabulous. They appeal to a broad spectrum of people. And of course, Tanya Tagaq, who is internationally famous. Everybody talks about her. My brother talked about her the other day, and I said, I'm going to meet her for the first time next week. So I'm honored to be here with you all. You are the sort of the next generation. It's a new era. What are your thoughts on your music and identity? Let's start with Susan.
I think they're the next generation. We're the done ones.
Yes, okay, all right, okay. Well, I always thought of you as being,
Thank you, Tanya. I learn something new every time I sit back and listen to your words and share your story. And I think that's the power of art in general, is it gives us the forum and the platform we need as Indigenous artists to share the histories. But I've had the privilege of teaching a class in Oakville that wound up yesterday, and it's a great group of grade 10 students. And the challenge was always coming back to this assimilation policy. And the issue I was trying to embed in them in the seven classes I had with them was that Indigenous culture, Aboriginal culture, Inuit, First Nations, Métis, it began, well, it happened. It happened over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It didn't begin when colonization began. And I made a point of making this part of the class because what this career has done for me these last 25 years is open even my eyes to that realization. So part of the in a presentation I do very similar to what you did, share ancestor photos and history. I begin with this 1-minute piece that National Film Board had done called the Bering Land Bridge, the Land Bridge. And this 1-minute vignette came out, I would say maybe 40 years ago, 35 years ago. And when I was researching to put this presentation together, I came across this vignette and I was looking at it and it occurred, and this is about 4 or 5 years ago, I'm at home watching this vignette and it occurred to me that I realized as I was watching this vignette that when I saw this at home in Arviat on CBC, looking at this 1-minute piece, I'm thinking, those are cool people. But those were my people, and I didn't even know it when I was watching this vignette, because we didn't teach that. We don't teach that even in our schools to our children. We don't learn it in our homes because my parents were the last generation to live the traditional way of life, and then they were highly Christianized. I am a Christian, I believe in God. But they were so influenced by religion that we were brought up completely opposite. And the thing that music and art has done for me is that it's over the last 25 years, it's opened up this place and space where all opinions, thoughts, cultures, everything matters. Everything is a part of recovering and building bridges. I can go on, but that's been what art has done for me, and that's what now we share through our art.
Well, let me ask you a question, Susan. When you came out with Arctic Rose, the album, it was a big hit. People put on the music and listen to it, and you think, oh, what pretty songs, what lovely songs, and music as entertainment. But what did that music and that album mean to you? What were you actually conveying?
Well, that was, that process, I just moved to Ottawa. I was literally 3-4 months living in Ottawa when a series of things happened around the same time. I should say that before I moved to Ottawa, I never sang. I was not a singer. I was not a songwriter. I wrote some poetry in high school. As a preacher's kid, I had to sing in church. That was the extent of my singing. So I moved to Ottawa very quickly. Part of my job description with the Indian Affairs was Inuit history in high schools around Ottawa. So I included this poem called Searching that I'd written, Kinyakpunga, in Inuktitut. And my boss at the time and I decided we should write a short documentary about living between two worlds to get a grade 12 diploma. So I was in residential school in Yellowknife, very different, but still residential school. So grade 10, 11, and 12. Wrote this poem in high school, made it part of what was supposed to be a documentary that became a music video that Denise Donlin got a hold of somehow, that got on Much Music. And I was doing my day job, night schooling for my pilot's license, and I had a music video playing on Much Music. But I had left small town Nunavut after my own court proceedings, which were having filed charges against my abuser. And I left because the system 25, 30 years ago was broken. It didn't work for our environment, our small town communities. He served less time than it took to get him convicted. And as you know, in small town Nunavut, once everybody knows, and everything had changed. So I had to leave, and that's why I moved to Ottawa, very quickly, I'm through this music video searching, I'm getting all these phone calls. Can you sing here? Can you sing there? I'm not a singer. I left to leave. I'm hiding. I need to heal. I need to do something.
So Arctic Rose was a way of getting the pain
Arctic
out?
Rose
It was a way
became
of
a
purging?
process of putting all that into writing. And then all this writing became this Arctic Rose album, which there's literally not one single pretty song in Arctic Rose if you listen to the words. It's all about the anger and tears and the court system and all of the stuff that I had left behind.
And did that heal you? Did that help you feel better?
It began to open up something. Now, I hadn't yet decided I was a singer-songwriter, even with the release of the Arctic Rose album. I was still working a day job. I was working for the ITK, in fact, and I don't know, I didn't think of myself as you might know, when, like Tanya says, trauma victims also become addictive by nature. I had a lot of issues. And so the last place I wanted to be was on stage, entertaining. And singing songs of loss and pain when I didn't feel that I had really dealt with the loss and hadn't started to deal with it. Didn't even know I could deal with the loss and pain. You know, that's the degree of work that needs to be done, is we need to know how to get to the real pain and how to really heal it. And that's a whole other panel discussion. But that was the Arctic Rose process. And slowly, okay, I can take control a little bit at a time of my life. And that's been the journey through the songwriting and performing.
That's wonderful. Let me go over to you, Bear Witness. You've heard what Susan has said. You and I are sort of related as cousins. You're Cayuga, I'm Mohawk. Yep. And although this is the first time we've met, we sort of have a past connection. But anyways, maybe you want to talk a little bit about your journey to music. Is it based upon pain? Is it based upon this sort of, as Tanya said, the genocidal relationship we have with the mainstream? Or are you having fun? Or, I mean, what are you all about? What's your music all about?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that is maybe where we come from, a different place with A Tribe Called Red, which is we wanted to throw a dance party.
Yeah.
And decided that if we put some posters up around the Native Students Association, if we put some posters up around the Native Center, that we could get this whole crowd of Indigenous people who weren't going out to other events.
Right.
And that became something very political very quickly. It's not something we were trying to do, but you start to claim space for Indigenous people within the urban environment, you're making a statement. So it wasn't something we tried to do at all. And actually, we were having a bit of a conversation, Susan and I, before we came out, about taking care of ourselves as artists. As Indigenous artists, we take on a lot of responsibility, you know, to represent and speak about Indigenous issues, especially when we're using our culture in our work. And one of the things that you said right away was that feeling of responsibility, that this isn't a choice, this is something we have to do. That filled me with so much confidence and so much happiness to hear you say that, because I say that all the time, like I have to remind myself. And sorry, I'm gonna get a little emotional here, because just to feel that there's other artists who have gone through those same feelings.
Let me ask you this. You know, you're taking traditional music, you know, and drumming, and then you're contemporizing it, you know, adding voice and adding a different rhythm and everything, and then you have little different instruments, you know, adding in, and it's very catchy and, you know, very dance-like and fun. Do you ever get criticism for that, taking what would be considered, you know, perhaps spiritual music or something seriously that shouldn't be tampered with?
The only places where we've really gotten criticism is not so much around the remixing, but around where we play the music. In clubs, in bars, environments where there's alcohol being served, and using a word like powwow, using those powwow drums in our music, is something that is definitely people have expressed some uncomfortableness with. But when we've had those conversations, those interactions where people have expressed that, the same people are usually saying, I also see the value and the importance of what you're doing because you're getting our youth involved in culture.
Right. Is your music a way of healing? Or is it entertainment, or is it both?
I mean, I think it's both. I think our music means a lot of different things to different people in our audience, you know. There's been a crazy phenomenon recently where I've watched people crying in the audience, and people who will be crying for 15, 20 minutes during the set, and I think it is a healing experience, you know. It's like when...
Are you sure you were singing in tune?
Well, fortunately, I don't sing. But it's specifically when things like our one of our dancers, Lunacy, you know, when she'll hit the stage in her shawl, doing the shawl dance, and you'll just see that affect the people in the audience so much. Indigenous people watching it, just to see, I think just to see that spotlight on culture.
Pride, a feeling of pride.
Yeah, and visibility.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's a huge thing for me. You know, we always get asked all these things about Indigenous issues, and it's such a broad thing, and trying to figure out what to talk about. And I kind of decided that in the kind of work I'm doing, the thing that I can affect most is visibility and how I present myself to the world and how I want to be seen. And that is something that goes back to how I grew up. We were actually talking before we came out about seeing a poster of you that was up, you know, in like a high school guidance office or something like that, and seeing that poster was a huge inspiration for me. You know, because it was that idea of seeing an Indigenous person who was visible, who was, you know, getting recognition for excellence in their craft. I come from a long line of Indigenous artists, and I'm probably the most visible out of any of them. By far not the most talented. You know, like that. So that idea that there's been all of these talented Indigenous artists, generations of them, that have gone unnoticed. And to be noticed meant to give up your indigeneity often. And so, you know, in that, it's a really new thing for us to be up here representing the way that we all are.
Yeah, and it's great, and congratulations for all your success, and thank you for the plug. I had more hair back then on that poster, yeah. Mike Downey, the brother of Gord Downey, son of, you'll have to tell us, but Edgar Downey and Mrs. Downey. Now, you know, Mike, you're not Indigenous, but of course everybody's aware of Gord's effort and your effort, the Wenjack story in the movie and the fund. You were telling me a little before this that, you know, at some point you weren't even aware of residential schools. This was a big shock. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's right, John. It was as recent as, it was less than 5 years ago. And I knew a little bit because I'd been up to Pond Inlet with you. And I heard a little bit about residential schools up there, and it just, you know, I'm ashamed. Zacharias Canuck was talking a little bit about coming off the land and the family, and families followed their children to the school, and I didn't connect, I didn't understand. I understood his story. But then about 5 years ago, I was driving in my car, and I heard the story of a little boy running away from residential school in 1966, Channy Wenjack, and who tried to walk home 600 kilometers, and it just hit me over the head as I was driving. I was just struck by this image, and I realized I didn't know anything about residential schools. It was just a big question mark. And I kind of raced home and started looking online, and it was just, holy smokes, this is And I'm a filmmaker, so you're kind of thinking, you know, I've done all sorts of different projects, been all over the place, and I had this really weird feeling of, wow, why don't I know this? And the next day, Gord and I were having lunch. I'd seen him that night very briefly at a performance, and the next day we're having lunch. I told him a little bit that night, and the next day we were both like, what do you know about this? Gord's like, almost nothing. And it's just a weird feeling, you know? You just feel culpable. You feel like, how do I not know this? So we decided that day that we were going to try to figure that this story to us just seems so powerful. This little boy, my son Will was 12 at the time, but you didn't really even need that kind of connection. And that started, Gord started to write these poems as we tried to figure out how we were going to tell this story. And we really didn't know how, but we knew we were going to try, and it took 4 years for it to happen, but I'm so thankful that it happened for us.
In a way, you know, in this particular circumstance, music and the fame of Gord and the band and everything is a political tool. Fame, music becomes a political tool and has had a deep impact. You know, if I stood up and mentioned this story, people, you know, I'd get 20 people to listen, but I think all of Canada has benefited and learned from this effort of you and your brother, and you're to be congratulated and commended because there are too few non-Aboriginal people who sort of care and acknowledge what happened. So I think all of us thank you for this contribution you've made. And but again, you know, do you see yourself as being political, that this effort was politics, or was it just social justice to you, or just
I think it was probably more just right and wrong. It just seems so wrong, and that was my first reaction to hearing this story. It seems so wrong, and then yeah, so it was kind of right and wrong. We did feel that the story was a really good story for an on-ramp, if you will. It's a terrible, I mean, it's just such an awful legacy. And we kind of thought, beyond Gord's perhaps ability to bring his fans into the tent, we thought that the story of a little boy running away and dying along the tracks was tragic, but it was also safe for people to go, oh my gosh, that's so sad. And then our feeling was that maybe this can be an on-ramp for other people to learn more, because I mean the stories keep coming and they get a lot, you know, they're a lot darker than a little boy by himself on the tracks. And so we, I think we did feel like there's just an opportunity to use this story to get it out to not just Gord's fans, but to the country. And also I think kind of come with the message too that even if you're coming to this now, it's okay, but keep coming.
Right.
Don't turn away.
Right.
And keep following that path.
Right.
So
So I'd like to ask all of you, if I could ask Tanya, what's your view of reconciliation? You know, this long, dark history of marginalization, oppression, you know, we'll take everything, you get nothing. Who cares if 1,100 women die, you know? Where do we as a country, and where do you as an artist, where do we go? What is reconciliation to you?
If you look at things scientifically, the equal and opposite reaction to residential schools would be the government funding schools that taught our languages and taught our culture to us.
So to promote
Give
instead
back
of
what was
suppress.
taken away.
Yeah.
Respect the treaty system. Provide people with adequate health care. Like, just cauterize the wound first before you start dicking around with all this little stuff you were talking about. Like, get real about it. Put Indigenous people at the helm, and put a lot of money into giving us back what was taken away.
Do you think,
Because the root of Canadian culture is us, you know, this, especially with this Canada 150 stuff. it's so gag worthy. Like, I mean, as an Indigenous person, it's so embarrassing. It's like, way to celebrate colonialism! Woo! I just, oh, it's so eye rolly. I can't even handle it.
Yeah. Well, for us, the
And-
country's thousands of years old. It's
Yeah.
not 150 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bear
Like,
witness.
was it 15,000-year-old community found in BC recently, right?
Yeah.
15,000.
Interesting. Bear witness, what is your view on reconciliation?
Yeah, much the same as Tanya, that it's, 4 or 5 steps too soon. We got a lot of more work that needs to be done before we can start talking about reconciliation. The perfect analogy of how this is still an open wound. We're going to get there, but I think the kind of reconciliation that's being put on the table right now doesn't serve us, doesn't serve Indigenous people.
Maybe it just makes Canadians feel less guilty.
Well, yeah.
It's a way of excusing them.
It's the excusing, exactly. Like you were saying earlier that apartheid still exists in Canada. I mean, I think you can make that. There's a real physical chain reaction there. That they looked at the reservation systems here when they started apartheid in South Africa. They at least waited till they ended it to start talking about truth and reconciliation.
And South Africa ended apartheid in
That's
the
what I'm
90s.
saying. And
Black
then they-
America burnt down Chicago and Los Angeles to get civil rights advancement. Here we are in this peaceful little country saying we're better than every other country, and our official policy is apartheid.
I was watching some random documentary on TV last night that was talking about after the Second World War and how they were trying to make laws against the destruction of culture. And that it started being this anti-barbarism thing and was evolving into targeting libraries, targeting cultural spaces, and that it was Canada and the United States that stopped that cultural element from going into those laws because they were worried about the backlash for their treatment of Indigenous people. And I heard, that's just, those things are so purposeful. Because again, like Tanya was saying, the oppression of Indigenous people is at the base of this colonial construct.
Yeah. Mike, your views on reconciliation?
Yeah, as a hoser from Kingston, represent. My feeling is, I just think we can't leave it to the government. I think every Canadian needs to find a way to get involved and stay involved and talk about it and keep talking about it and push for more and more action on this front. I think it's going to take a long time, but it's never going to get anywhere unless everybody in this room and everybody, that we know, they know how we feel about it, and we keep pushing forward. So,
Right.
yeah.
Susan, your thoughts on reconciliation?
When this first came up after the Truth and Reconciliation, the initial stage, and then we went into, well, now let's begin the reconciliation process. And there was an ask on social media, what does reconciliation mean to you? And somebody, and this is about 3 years ago now, and somebody started it, I think the best way, well, reconciliation requires 2 parties to participate. The process itself it's not going to take a year, it's not going to take 5 years, it's not even going to take 10 years. It's going to take several generations. There's too much on both sides of this process. I mean, even as the colonized, the effects of the colonization, that has to be undone first. And how do we do that? That's just one part of the reconciliation story.
Well, that takes generations.
And
yeah.
that takes generations. So I think we're on a track, but the end picture, it's way back there in the fog. It's there, but it's way back there. And I think Canada 150 has an opportunity that they're completely missing as a country to make, when you look at the information available to us through, for example, the First Nations Caring Society and Cindy Blackstock and the work she's done, and the Jordan's Principle, there is an opportunity for the government to say, we're beginning again in good faith. Here's what we can get behind to show.
But they're resisting.
They're resisting again, and why?
Yeah. No good reason.
No good reason.
Yeah.
So how can we have a reconciliation conversation when people like the Cindy Blackstocks have done the initial work, proven it, documented it, scientifically researched it, it's there. Yeah.
Cindy Blackstock, for those of you who don't know, took the government to court. She's a child welfare worker where a lot of First Nations and Indigenous children are taken into foster homes, and she's saying that they're not getting the same level of care in the foster homes. There's not enough money being spent, and she argues that money should be spent equally for Indigenous kids as it should be for the mainstream kids in foster care, health, medicine, nutrition, so on and so forth. She actually won the case, and the federal government still is not providing the support and resisting. So that's the Cindy Blackstock story. And as Susan said, you know, there's no good reason. The courts have recognized this is a social injustice and it should be rectified. And for some reason, our nice liberal government is not doing it. So what do you hope for your kids in the next generation? I mean, we talked earlier, I think we were talking about Buffy Sainte-Marie, that in the 1950s or 60s, imagine what the politics then were like. I mean, you know, she was probably the only First Nations person in the public eye, and the politics and racism were, you know, 100 times worse they are now. They're a little better now, you know, they're a little better, sort of. But what do where do you see your kids in 20 years from now? What are your hopes for them and should they become an entertainer or a musician? Will they be coming from a place of pain? Will we be talking about reconciliation then? Because what you're doing is very different than 40, 50 years ago. You know, what are your thoughts? Tanya, you want to start? Susan wants to start? Okay.
Well, let's go to the question. I have a 20-year-old, and he's a musician and just finishing up his first year of musical theater. No matter how much my husband and I tried to dissuade him from, not because the arts itself is an incredible career, but it's a tough one. And it's really, really difficult, just as Canadian artists, to make a living as Canadian artists. So we said, son, be sure that that's what you want to do, because it's not going to be easy, trust us. Having said that, he's completely embraced it, and we're very, very proud of him. And what he is working through right now, he's raised in Oakville, so there's this Inuk, half Inuk young man, raised in Oakville, Ontario. Couldn't be further from Inuit culture, or Indigenous culture even though he is exposed to it. And then he identified himself a couple of years ago that he feels like an in-betweener. What's an in-betweener? I asked him. Well, I'm kind of stuck between two worlds. I said, well, then you live in there. I think our responsibility, because we've ended up in the careers we've ended up in, and to make it a sustainable career, we've had to leave home to be able to afford to do this work we've fallen in love with. Our children are becoming the next generation of artists who have to find their place in this world, and we have to support that. They have a foundation of culture. He's very close to my family in Nunavut. We go up there often. But he himself gave it a word, and I think that's the start. That's the first start. Is this is how I feel. Okay, well, but I'll be the last person to put the pressure of responsibility of being a spokesperson on him. All I want is for him to be happy and healthy and live the life he wants.
Right. So you think there's a great weight to his being an in-betweener? I think
him coming to that realization was his way of choosing whether he will let that be a burden or not. I don't know if he's resolved it yet. I don't know if he's chosen a side. I don't think there is a side to choose. But he's certainly very sensitive to the position he's in. You know, he loves the life he's chosen for now. He's only 20. I'm sure there's going to be 3 or 4 more tries before he finds the thing he wants to do. But he knows who he is right now, and that's, I think, a lot of the battle for our young up-and-coming in-between Indigenous artists who have to live
No.
in
There is-
urban settings.
There is no one identity. There is no stereotype. There isn't, you know, I'm half white. I'm half Mohawk, half white. I'm in-betweener. People used to tease me about it. I used to be sensitive about it, but after a while, I just used to say, well, you know, I'm a Mennonite. They'd say, a Mennonite? Yeah, I'm a woman by day and a man at night. I'm in between. So, hope I'm not being politically offensive. But anyways, so bear witness. Your thoughts on kids and what do you hope for them and music and identity?
Well, first off, I think what you said to your son is the greatest gift that an artist parent can give to their child who's going into the arts. My family did the same thing for me, and it puts you in a position where you're prepared to do the work. You know, and I think that's the best way you could prepare him for success in what he wants to do. My uncle, who's a singer-songwriter, wrote a song called The Half-Breed Blues. One of the hooks is, I got 1 foot in a moccasin and 1 in a Triple E shoe. So, you know, I think there's a big spot for all of us that are, you know, somewhere in between. And I think that's part of where the culture is right now, is finding how we fit in, how the lives we find ourselves living now relate to the traditional knowledge and that history that many of us have grown up with. And I think
Are you hopeful or are you scared?
I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful. You know, I think what we do now is to lay the road for the next generation. That's always what I have in the back of my head. I come from a family of trailblazers who fought to allow me now to sit up here and call myself an artist. So I want to continue that history and help lay the ground for the next generation. I'm 39 now, and I get called up as a youth. You know, I'm always saying I'm not a youth, guys, anymore. And you really got to find a real young person to talk to, because, you know, I'm not the youth voice, and I want to hear that youth voice right now. I want to know what this next generation of Indigenous artists is going to do, because, again, like I come back to the representation. You know, I grew up in a house where when there was a Native person on TV, my mom would be yelling, "Bear, Bear, come in the room, there's Indians on TV." You know, and it could be a John Wayne movie or it could be whatever, but there was an excitement because there was representation there. And now, you know, there's a spotlight on what many of us are doing. And so I can't wait to see what a generation who did see themselves in something in pop culture, that there were things out there that looked like them, that spoke like them, that had an experience that was like theirs.
Yeah. Yeah. Tanya, you referenced your daughter in your presentation this morning. What are your hopes for her? And, you know,
Well, luckily my first daughter is half Basque, and Basque people are the indigenous people in south of France and north of Spain. And she speaks Euskara, and Basque people have been colonized by the French and Spanish government. So I think no matter, and you know what's really crazy is Basque people used to come over here and come to the Hudson's Bay long before this country was colonized. And there's even similarities in the language. Like their word for brother is aniak, kule, and it's ani for us. And the language is set up the same. It's the oldest language in Europe. They can't really place it. So my daughter's got a natural tendency towards dissent and awareness. And no matter how she chooses to use that, I think it'll be positive. If anything, she could write a very interesting paper on the similarities between Inuktitut and Euskara. What I hope for my children, we'll see what happens, because I'm raising them in a healthy home and a peaceful home. And even though I move around a lot and there isn't a lot of stability, they're safe and loved, and they didn't grow up seeing the same things. So let's think that every generation is just going to get stronger and brighter and healthier, and we're going to have deeper and deeper roots within this culture that we're all living in. And back to that reconciliation thing, you know, what I've learned from going from country to country, it's so interesting. Something will be rude in my culture that is perfectly acceptable in another culture. And what it is, our cultural climate is dictated by the individual and then by the school of fish that we are. So there's a collective social consciousness that's being affected by art right now, by art, by people waking up. So I think that the way this government's gonna work, or the way the government's gonna change, is by every single one of us taking the opportunity to learn and understand and cry out. And until, like, I remember growing up, it was still bad to be gay, right? And now you're an idiot if you're a homophobe, right? Like, so I'm hoping that with all of us working together, we'll force the hand of the government into making it easier for us. And I think it's up to the youth to pick up the mantle, and it's up to every single one of us to bear some of the weight, because it's a little bit unfair for the people that are already hurting to have to bear the additional pressure. And that's why I'm so appreciative of what you've done in your work. Thank you. Because, yeah, I can't talk to the hosers. You can talk to the awesome hosers. So, yeah, I do feel very hopeful when I see my children happy and healthy. And I have an immense pride for the home that I provide for them and the love and care I give to them. And that in itself is very healing. So there's lots of goodness ahead.
I want to talk about identity, your music and identity, because I'm only half Mohawk and I was a conductor. A lot of people would say, well, you're not really a real Indian. You know, and I used to think about it, and I used to say, well, maybe I'm not a real Indian. Then I used to say, well, you know, I think I am a real Indian, but I'm just not the kind of Indian you want me to be. And then what is a real Indian? And so what is my identity? And I think, you know, there's a lot of intermarriage, well, everywhere in Canada, and it's fine. And it's nobody's fault, you know. And so the question is then, I find in all of our music, you know, I conduct European symphonic music, or I used to. Your music comes from a traditional place, but it's contemporized. It's not precisely traditional. Susan, your songs, your words, your feelings, you know, your identity, your pain is expressed through the music, but it's popular music. And the same for you, Bear Witness. You know, you've got really traditional music, and you've sort of hipped it up, and it's groovy, you know, and you know, so yeah. Well, that's my generation, you know. Listen, you laugh, but we're going back to groovy sooner or later. Yeah. So, but the point is, you know, identity. Your identity in your music. You know, this is a panel on Indigenous music and Indigenous musicians. It's not exactly historical, traditional, pure music, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's great. But, you know, your thoughts on identity in your music.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah.
I once had a reporter ask me if I was a modern Inuk.
Yeah.
And I was like, are you a modern reporter? Like, we're talking here at the same time, aren't we? And our cultures change so quickly. Like my mother being born and raised in an igloo, and the kind of struggle that comes from both sides. Like, what frustrates me is when people think I'm representing all Inuit, that I'm only representing myself, and I happen to be a Inuk woman, so I'm representing a segment of my ideologies and my culture, which I own because I am it. So identity is interesting. Like I'll have people think I'm denouncing tradition by moving forward. And in actuality, what I think is that in this culture right now, Inuit can be a doctor or a lawyer or a porn star or a writer or make a horror film or do any, like, there shouldn't be any pressure. Like, or you could be a hunter and do the dog team, you could do the traditional thing. There shouldn't be pressure culturally for us to stay in a box or get out of a box, stay in a box, anything. We're allowed to be what we want to be.
Freedom,
And
freedom.
yeah, cultural freedom. That's
No
that's what
boundaries.
I want. And I don't expect people to comprehend or even enjoy my music, because like I'm born and raised up there, but yeah, I went to residential school for high school. And then since we started touring, like I'm really into going to contemporary art galleries. I studied art, and I like applying concept to pieces. I like contemporary music. I like noise music. I love Cindy Sherman. I love Anish Kapoor is one of my favorite artists. Like, so what I'm doing why is it because I'm an Inuk that what I'm doing in a contemporary sense is applied to this pan-Inuit concept? I think it's total bullshit, and that I'm allowed to be free and do what I want, and not have bear the burden of people saying I'm a traditional artist, because I'm not.
Yeah.
And I also get a lot of hate mail from Inuit too, that are upset and saying that I'm breaking down tradition. And I understand where they're coming from, because our culture has changed so quickly. But I also don't expect them to understand where I'm coming from, because up there, you know what we need up there? We need access to contemporary art. We need access to this society that I remember growing up, and a skyscraper might as well have been a purple dragon. It's like, it's fiction, right? So when you're up there, you're looking at the rest of the world as almost a fictitious place if you've never traveled out.
I think it's part of colonization, where this imposed ideal that an indigenous person, an Inuk, has to be a certain thing. A First Nation has to be a certain thing. And if you're not that, you're no longer that person. Yeah.
Yeah, like kind and patient and sweet and and enduring and loving and all these things. It's like, what if I want to be an asshole?
Yeah,
What if I want to be that?
Yeah.
I'm allowed to be that. Sorry, that's such a weird answer.
Although it's a good illustration. I think
Yeah.
everybody got it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, that's kind of when I'm thinking about identity, we can only identify with what we're born into and how we're raised. Like, there are people born and raised alongside me in Cambridge Bay, like, that went to residential school with me, that were born, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed people that were born and raised in Cambridge, and they're Inuit as far as I'm concerned. It's not blood, but it is blood, and I've also met Inuit in the city that have been adopted out that have no connection to the culture, and they're Inuit too. It's there isn't this. This society tends to objectify us to the point where they see us as a static people.
And culture isn't static, it's
It's
dynamic.
never- yeah, it's never static.
The only constant is change. You can't stop change, it exists, and the only constant is that change will always occur and continue. Susan, your thoughts on identity and your music?
Yeah. So, apagayaw gayuk kama kanong inu tidlunga amma inu nangan miudong naklunga these last 25 years. Kano inu nira duluak po nga titiraranga maimngiw tinig. Matap ko titirak takka sulid luavik pan takpa niya katangin rama. So I'm conversational Inuktitut. What I've learned since, again, this incredible opportunity, which was this culture, this career, is we've lost a lot of traditional Inuktitut. And who are we, who are the in-betweeners, who have fallen in love with our careers, and to do this, we've had to live away from home. How can we be true representatives of the culture? This is almost always a question I get asked in my interviews. How long have you been away from Nunavut now? Well, half my life. Well, do you still think you have a true representation of your culture? Absolutely. I will be Inuk forever. I still dream in Inuktitut. I still get angry in Inuktitut. It's DNA. It's going to be there forever. And it's never been an issue for me.
And your music, which is popular in nature, is simply a tool to express it.
It's simply a tool to express it. And the challenge for me in the early years, especially writing the first album, This Child, I remember when OCM came out, and there was so much excitement about, Inuit music. When you listen to it, the only thing really that's Inuit culture about it was the image of, and actually we did record the qilaut, the big drum. So when my producer and I were writing the album, and he kept asking, so give me some traditional Inuit sounds and ideas, and I'm not a throat singer. I've tried and tried and tried. I can't do it. I actually went on YouTube a gazillion times to learn from your class, one of your classes. I still can't get it, and I told my producer, I don't know. There's very little traditional Inuit sounds that we can incorporate and call Inuit music. So we're making it up as we go sometimes.
It's called composing.
It's there you go. But I've never doubted myself as an Inuk person. As an Inuk, I always will be. Yeah.
You just are.
I just am.
Mike, what are your thoughts on identity? You can either speak to native identity or your own identity or this.
Your hoser
we're-
identity?
well,
Yeah.
we're talking about the topic of the stereotypical Indian and how
Yeah.
these performers are not.
That's right.
And does that make them non-indigenous or do you know? I got to fill the time, guys. We got 10 more minutes. I got 10 more minutes. Well, no, I think this is good. Let's put some pressure on him and see what he
Yeah.
has to say.
Let's see if he screws up.
Yeah, you've heard what everybody had to say
I
about
put my
identity.
microphone down for a reason, John.
Yeah, no. I saw you though. I saw you sweating there.
Yeah.
There's no escape.
Okay. I'll keep it short. My experience over the last, really less than a year, has been that I think I had a lot of probably old ideas about what it meant to be Indigenous, and all I meet is individuals, and everyone has, I think their own message. Obviously, they come, as an Indigenous person. I don't even know if we're talking 500 nations, 500 languages, and I do think we have in white Canada now non-Indigenous Canada, I think we do have a sort of some old idea that there will be a single voice that will kind of capture what the experience is, what it means to be Indigenous, and I just don't see how that's remotely possible.
Tonto, the modern Tonto.
Yeah, exactly. I am also struck by some of the common, elements to it of spirituality and obviously connection to nature, and that really fascinates me. Personally for me, what I've really got so much from is from a few sort of relationships where it just feels like this vast body of knowledge and spirituality that I just find so fascinating to me. The idea of being connected to everything, not just each other, but the land, the rocks, and then rocks. And the further you sort of go into that, I'm so blown away by it. We could get rid of all the yoga studios, I think, in the country, and replace it with, smudging and drum circles, whatever that is. It's an incredible portal, I find, to like sort of self advancement or sort of understanding yourself. So
I think
I'm fascinated by
I think in a way
all the different cultures.
you're kind of dancing around our connection to nature, our connection to the environment, the natural relationship. You spoke about it in your presentation about, killing animals. It's natural and processing, and it's a gift, and that in a way I go to Loblaws and I touch the meat. I don't kill it. I just, but it's exactly what you were saying. We've lost our humanity and our deep connection.
We've well, what I see looking outward is an amplification of fear of death, causing a numbness during life, and shame, lots of shame surrounding sex, and these weird things that don't belong traditionally in my culture.
Bear witness, do you have any shame about sex? Or anybody want to talk about this out there? What are your thoughts about our connection? Have we lost our connection to the environment? Is this one of our big problems?
Well, there's an old prophecy, I think it's a Hopi prophecy, about how the gift of indigenous people of North America is the gift of memory, and that we would be, there would come a time where we'd have to remind the rest of the world of that connection to the earth. Because there was a time where every culture on this planet had that connection. There just came a time in Europe where they killed all those people and then went off and tried to kill the rest of the people in the world who had that connection. And that now we have, indigenous people, not just in North America, but all over the world, who still have managed to hang on to some piece of that. And this is something that I think Tribe grew out of, was this moment where this light turned on to say, we need to start sharing these things again. That, our communities were coming to a point to be strong enough in ourselves again, when we could show these things to the world that we've wrapped up and kept so tight and so close to ourselves, in fear that that would be stripped away from us as well. But now we have this gift to share of memory, of that connection that we all need as humans. And we talk a lot about indigenous issues, but indigenous issues, really what that should equal out to is human issues. John Trudell was a big part of our last album. And what he gave us, really, it directed the whole album, and what we were trying to do, really, it just gave us the whole direction for it. And one of the things that he talks about a lot was that we have to remember what it means to be human and what it means to treat other people as humans. And that's something that I try to live by every day now. And if you think about all of the names that we have for ourselves, our traditional names are almost always the people. And it's just remembering that really simple thing, that we're all human beings. We're all part of this, not just part of this earth, we're all part of this universe. We're all part of, I'm going to get really far out there now for whatever it is, 9:30 in the morning. But, there's a connectivity to everything that needs to be recognized. And if we can tap into that and remember the power of the individual within that connectivity, that we can remember, bring forth again this power that I think is going to allow us to change the direction of history up until now, you know, and that we're at that brink. These last holdouts of indigenous people around the world are the turning point now, you know, and that memory and that connection, there's so much power in that I have so much hope for the future, because the more I tour and the more I talk to people, I see more and more people all over the world who are recognizing that need for that connection, that power that's inside of all of us to change this reality, because there's something wrong right now. We're not living right.
Yeah.
You know, and we need to figure that out as soon as possible.
Yeah, and so music is a great tool. So we've talked about music as sharing, music as expressing pain. We talk bridging cultures, reaching out.
And it's not about denouncing technology or how far we've come. It's about the loss of balance, and people are lonely for themselves. Where people are lonely, I see people everywhere being anxious or stressed, or you know, and it's this lack of connection to your own being and being ashamed of who you are because of the way the society has volleyed us into this kind of unattainable way of living, when it comes to climate, when it comes to social climate, when it comes to how we treat each other as individuals and how we treat ourselves and what we put into our bodies. The disconnect is resonant in every layer of who we are in all of our consciousness, and every single person feels it and knows it, that there's something wrong. And you're right, we're going to fix it by doing this.
I'd like to close this panel. We're out of time at this point, but I'd like to, first of all, thank all of you. And just remember what Louis Riel said before they hung him, that my people will sleep for 100 years, and when they awaken, it will be the artists who lead them. And I think you're fine representatives of leading discussion, insight, thought, political discussion in this country, and creating a new and higher awareness of Indigenous people, breaking the stereotype. I think it's all healthy and timely, and poor old Louis had something going, you know, when he thought of all this. So anyways, I'd like to thank you this morning.